You have accepted a verdict about yourself that you need not have accepted. Perhaps a business failure convinced you that you lack entrepreneurial capacity. Perhaps rejection in relationships persuaded you that lasting partnership is impossible for you. Perhaps setbacks in pursuing a skill led you to conclude you simply don't have what it takes. You believe these verdicts are facts imposed by reality. They are not. They are conclusions you have drawn, and conclusions can be refused. I tell you this plainly. You cannot be defeated unless you accept defeat. This is not optimism or positive thinking. This is observation of how defeat actually functions in human experience. External forces can create obstacles. They can limit your options. They can make success more difficult. But they cannot, by themselves, make you defeated. Defeat requires your consent. It requires you to grant circumstances authority to determine your fate, authority they do not inherently possess. Most people live their entire lives never examining who they have granted this authority to. Employers, markets, critics, family members, past failures. They unconsciously surrender the one sovereignty that cannot be taken from them, the power to refuse defeat's verdict. What I will show you in these pages is not how to avoid difficulty or guarantee success. I will show you how to reclaim authority over the one thing that truly determines whether you are defeated, your own verdict about what circumstances mean. The authority you never knew you possessed. I learned a truth in the autumn of 1915 that changed the course of my life, though I did not fully grasp its significance until years later. The catastrophe at Gallipoli had occurred. Tens of thousands of our finest men had fallen in that ill-fated campaign, and the entire political establishment, newspapers, colleagues in Parliament, former allies, declared with one voice that my career was finished. They were not cruel men. They simply believed what appeared to them obvious, that a man could be defeated by circumstances, that judgment rendered by events was final, that the world's verdict determined a man's future. But as I walked the grounds of my estate in those dark November days, excluded from office and widely blamed for disaster, something crystallized in my consciousness. The power to declare me defeated resided not in those newspaper editorials, not in parliamentary censure, not in social ostracism, not even in the objective facts of military failure. It resided solely within my own mind. This was not philosophy or consolation. It was practical observation of how defeat actually functions. You see, circumstances can create obstacles. They can limit options. They can make success more difficult. But they cannot by themselves make you defeated. Defeat is a verdict you render upon yourself. Until you accept that verdict, until you grant circumstances authority to determine your fate, you remain undefeated regardless of what has occurred. This distinction between external circumstances and internal verdict is not wordplay. It is the difference between those who shape their destiny and those who accept the destiny circumstances appear to impose. I faced three choices in those autumn days. I could accept society's verdict and retire from public life, convinced my capacity for service was finished. I could expend my energies in bitter recrimination, defending my decisions while secretly accepting I was done. Or I could refuse to grant circumstances, however dire they appeared, authority over my essential determination. I chose the third path, not from stubborn pride, but from recognition of a fundamental truth. The authority to declare me defeated belonged to me alone. Consider your own life in this moment. Where have you accepted verdicts about your capacity that you need not have accepted? Perhaps a failed business venture has convinced you that you lack entrepreneurial ability. Perhaps rejection in relationships has persuaded you that lasting partnership is impossible for you. Perhaps setbacks in pursuing a skill have led you to conclude you simply don't have what it takes. But these conclusions are verdicts you have rendered, not facts imposed by reality. The circumstance was failure. The verdict was impossibility. They are not the same thing. Most people live their entire lives never examining who they have granted authority to determine their fate. They unconsciously give this power to employers, to markets, to critics, to family members, to statistical probability. And once surrendered, they never realize this authority can be reclaimed. But it can be. It must be. Until you recognize that the power to declare yourself defeated resides solely within you, you remain prisoner to every circumstance that arises. The moment you grasp this truth, not intellectually but in your bones, everything changes. This is not inspiration. This is not positive thinking. This is recognition of how defeat actually functions in human experience. You cannot be defeated unless you accept defeat. No external force can make you defeated. They can only make your path more difficult. The distinction between difficult circumstances and accepted defeat is the foundation of everything that follows in this work. Grasp it now, and you have claimed sovereignty you didn't know you possessed. When circumstances demand surrender, how to say no. In May of 1940, I faced a situation where every calculation, every reasonable assessment, every informed opinion pointed toward one conclusion: Britain should seek terms with Germany. The British Expeditionary Force had been driven into the sea at Dunkirk. Hitler's Wehrmacht stood poised across the Channel. My military advisors presented facts I could not dispute. We could not defeat Germany alone. American intervention was uncertain. Our resources were inadequate to sustain prolonged war. Halifax, my foreign secretary, argued with considerable logic that negotiating now might preserve something of Britain's position, while fighting on meant probable annihilation. I listened to these arguments. They were not foolish. The arithmetic of battalions, of aircraft, of material resources, all suggested that resistance was futile. But I understood something that those who counseled negotiation did not. The question was not, can we win, but rather, will we accept defeat? These are fundamentally different questions, and confusing them leads to catastrophic errors. The first question asks about probability. The second asks about determination. The first belongs to calculation. The second belongs to will. When circumstances appear to demand surrender with overwhelming force, when every voice around you counsels accommodation, you must learn to distinguish between tactical concerns and strategic capitulation. Those who advised negotiation were right about our immediate weakness. They were wrong about what that weakness meant we should do. Their error was treating low probability of success as justification for philosophical surrender. This is the fatal confusion that destroys more purposes than any external obstacle. Let me be precise about what I mean. When Halifax argued for negotiations, he was making this calculation: we probably cannot defeat Germany. Therefore, we should accept that defeat is inevitable and seek the best terms available. The first part of his reasoning was sound analysis of military probability. The second part was a category error, treating probability assessment as though it were a philosophical imperative. But probability never compels surrender of fundamental determination. It merely indicates that achieving your purpose will be difficult and require adaptation. Here is the framework you must internalize. When facing overwhelming circumstances, ask not, can I succeed, but rather, will I accept defeat? If your answer to the second question is no, and it must be no for purposes that genuinely matter to you, then the first question transforms entirely. It becomes, how do I refuse defeat given current constraints? This is not semantic trickery. It is the difference between treating circumstances as final verdict or as tactical challenge. Britain survived 1940 not because we knew we would win, I did not know that, but because enough of us refused to accept that circumstances, however dire, had authority to compel our surrender. This refusal did not change the facts. The German army remained formidable. Our resources remained limited. What changed was that by refusing to grant circumstances authority over our fundamental determination, we opened possibilities that those who had accepted defeat could not see. You face this choice now, though perhaps on smaller scale. Some circumstance in your life appears to demand surrender. Perhaps everyone around you counsels giving up. Perhaps the odds truly are poor. Perhaps reasonable people calculate that continued effort is pointless. Here is what you must understand. They may be right about the difficulty, right about the low probability, right that most people in your situation would fail. They are wrong that this justifies abandoning fundamental determination. The path forward when circumstances demand surrender is not to deny facts or engage in wishful thinking. It is to maintain absolute clarity about what you will and will not accept. You may need to change tactics. You may need to wait for better conditions. You may need to adapt your approach entirely. But you do not need to conclude that your fundamental purpose should be surrendered. This distinction between tactical flexibility and strategic surrender is what separates those who ultimately prevail from those who capitulate at the first genuine test. The daily practice of sovereign will, understanding sovereignty intellectually, provides no benefit whatsoever unless you translate that understanding into daily practice. I learned this during the wilderness years of the 1930s, when I spent a decade excluded from government while Hitler's power grew and my warnings went unheeded. I could have spent those years in bitterness or passive resignation. Instead, I established a practice that kept me conscious of the sovereignty I possessed, a practice that transformed understanding into embodied capacity. Each morning I would spend 10 minutes examining the previous day. I would write down 3 moments when circumstances had presented opportunities to either exercise sovereignty or surrender it. A newspaper's mockery of my views. Had I let it silence me, or had it sharpened my arguments? A political ally's discouragement. Had I adopted his pessimism or maintained my conviction? A setback in my writing. Had I questioned my capacity or treated it as a problem to solve? This simple discipline kept me aware of the choices I was making dozens of times daily, choices I had previously made unconsciously. You see, sovereignty is not claimed once in some dramatic moment. It is exercised or surrendered in countless small decisions throughout each day. The man who surrenders his determination to minor irritations, to others' casual opinions, to small setbacks, creates a pattern that will betray him when major challenges arrive. He has trained himself to grant circumstances authority. Conversely, the man who practices sovereign response to daily frustrations develops a capacity that serves him when genuine crisis emerges. This is not dramatic work. It is deliberately undramatic. It is choosing to respond to traffic delays, to minor rejections, to daily disappointments without granting them authority to determine your mood or conviction. Most people never realize how much sovereignty they surrender in these small moments. They believe that because the circumstances are minor, their responses don't matter. But it is precisely in these minor circumstances that you train the habits that will govern your response to major ones. Let me be specific about the practice. Tonight, before you sleep, write down 3 moments from today when you faced difficulty, pressure, or discouragement. For each moment, assess honestly. Did you exercise sovereignty or surrender it? Sovereignty means you acknowledge the circumstance while refusing to accept any verdict it implied about your capacity or future. Surrender means you accepted someone else's judgment, or let the circumstance dictate your determination, or drew conclusions about your limitations from temporary setbacks. Most days, you will discover you surrendered far more than you realized. Tomorrow morning, before the day's activities begin, write 1 sentence, today's sovereignty intention. Choose one specific type of situation you will likely face where you commit to sovereign response. Perhaps criticism from a colleague, perhaps frustration with a project's slow progress, perhaps someone's dismissive comment about your goals. Specify how you will respond sovereignly. Acknowledge the circumstance while refusing any verdict it implies about your essential capacity. This practice feels mechanical initially. You are making conscious what should be automatic. That is precisely the point. You are building new neural pathways, training new habits, developing capacity that will eventually become automatic. After 30 consecutive days of this practice, and I emphasize consecutive, for missing even 1 day weakens the pattern you are building, something shifts. The sovereign response begins to occur before you consciously choose it. You catch yourself about to accept a verdict, and you refuse it automatically. By the time I became Prime Minister in May 1940, refusing to accept defeat was no longer a deliberate choice requiring conscious effort. It had become my natural response, trained through years of daily practice in situations far less dramatic than leading a nation through its darkest hour. This transformation from conscious practice to automatic capacity is available to you, but it requires the discipline of daily attention. There is no shortcut. There is no substitute. There is only the accumulated power of thousands of small choices to exercise sovereignty rather than surrender it. Begin tonight. Make this commitment for 30 days. The transformation that follows will astonish you. The line between setback and defeat. In the summer of 1941, we suffered catastrophic losses in Greece and Crete. German forces drove us from positions we had fought to establish. Casualties were severe. Members of Parliament demanded my resignation, arguing these defeats proved our overall strategy had failed. The newspapers published lists of our setbacks under headlines suggesting British resistance was futile. It was a dark period, coming as it did after Dunkirk and the fall of France. But I understood something those critics did not. something that distinguishes strategic wisdom from tactical confusion. These were setbacks, not defeat. Our positions in Greece and Crete were untenable given German air superiority. This was tactical reality. But our fundamental purpose, defeating Nazi tyranny, remained valid regardless of these losses. We adapted our Mediterranean strategy while maintaining absolute determination about our ultimate objective. This is the critical distinction that most people fail to make, and this failure destroys more purposes than any external obstacle. Listen carefully to what I am telling you. Setbacks are tactical realities. Defeat is a philosophical conclusion. They are not the same thing, yet most people conflate them. A setback is an approach that did not work, a timeline that proved optimistic, a resource that proved inadequate, a judgment that was flawed. A setback says, this particular method failed. Defeat is when you conclude, therefore my fundamental purpose is invalid. The first is information for adaptation. The second is surrender, masquerading as realism. The military commander who withdraws from an untenable position is not surrendering. He is preserving his force's capacity to fight under more favorable conditions. I withdrew from Gallipoli not because I accepted that our strategic objective was wrong, but because the tactical execution had catastrophically failed. The objective, establishing a southern front against the Central Powers, remained sound. The particular approach, the naval and amphibious assault on the Dardanelles, had failed. Do you see the distinction? Abandoning failed tactics while maintaining strategic purpose is wisdom. Abandoning purpose because tactics failed is surrender. Yet this is precisely what most people do when they encounter failure. They attempt something and it does not work. Immediately, they leap from "this approach failed" to "I cannot succeed." This false equation destroys dreams before they have genuine chance. The entrepreneur whose first business fails concludes he lacks entrepreneurial capacity. The writer whose manuscript is rejected concludes she cannot write. The person whose relationship ends concludes he is incapable of lasting partnership. In each case, they have confused tactical setback with strategic defeat. Here is the framework you must internalize. When you face failure or setback, ask 3 questions in this order. First, has my approach failed? Often the answer is yes. Acknowledge this honestly. Second, does this failure indicate my fundamental purpose is invalid? The answer here is almost always no, unless the purpose itself was misguided from the start, which is rare. Third, what does this failure teach me about better approaches? This question transforms setback into education rather than verdict. Most people reverse this order. They experience failure and immediately question whether their fundamental purpose is worth pursuing. They treat setbacks as evidence that they should quit, rather than as information about what doesn't work. This is precisely backwards. Your fundamental determination should be the last thing you question, not the first. Question your tactics early and often. Question your timeline freely. Question your methods whenever results suggest they are inadequate. But question your fundamental purpose only rarely and after prolonged effort across multiple approaches. Consider the difference between 2 men who lose their employment during economic crisis. Both face identical circumstances. One concludes, "The economy has defeated me. I am finished. I should accept whatever comes." The other concludes, "My previous position is gone. This is a setback requiring new approach. What skills must I develop? What connections must I forge? What alternative paths exist? The circumstances are the same. The interpretation is opposite." One has accepted defeat. The other has acknowledged setback while refusing to grant it authority to determine his future. This distinction is not semantic. It determines everything about your response. If you treat setback as defeat, you stop trying. You lower expectations. You begin the process of accommodation with limitation. If you treat setback as tactical information, you adapt, you learn, you improve your approach while maintaining determination about your fundamental purpose. Over time, accumulated setbacks become either accumulated defeats that crush you or accumulated education that strengthens you. Which they become depends entirely on this distinction. I tell you plainly, every significant achievement in human history involved multiple tactical failures before ultimate success. Edison failed thousands of times creating the electric light. Britain lost battles throughout the war before final victory. Your setbacks are normal, not exceptional. They indicate you are attempting something difficult, not that you lack capacity. The question is not whether you will experience setbacks, you will, but whether you will treat them as information for adaptation or as verdicts justifying surrender. Master this distinction, and you possess the foundation of unstoppable will. The oak tree survives storms that destroy lesser vegetation not through resistance to wind, but through a particular combination: deep roots that anchor it immovably and flexible branches that bend without breaking. This is precisely the model for unstoppable mindset. Your fundamental purpose and principles must be absolutely rigid. These are your roots, driven deep into what matters most. Your tactics, methods, and specific approaches must be infinitely flexible. These are your branches, bending with circumstances without snapping. During the war, I maintained absolute rigidity about one thing: Britain would not surrender to Nazi tyranny. This was non-negotiable. It was the immovable root. Everything else was flexible branch. We adapted our military strategy constantly. We shifted from Europe to North Africa to the Mediterranean as circumstances dictated. We changed tactics based on intelligence. We formed alliances that would have been unthinkable years earlier. I, who had opposed Bolshevism, found myself allied with Stalin. But the fundamental purpose never wavered. Not once. Not for a moment. This combination of absolute determination about purpose with complete flexibility about tactics is what enabled Britain to survive when reasonable calculation suggested we could not. Yet most people invert this relationship. They are flexible about their fundamental purposes, abandoning them when circumstances become difficult, while remaining rigid about their tactics. They hold fast to approaches that clearly are not working because they cannot distinguish between stubbornness and determination. Or they abandon purposes that genuinely matter because adapting tactics feels like admitting failure. Both errors are fatal to achievement. Let me make this concrete. Your fundamental purpose might be, I will build something of value that serves others. This is a root. It does not change, but the specific form this takes, the particular business model, the specific market, the exact methods, these are branches. They must remain flexible. When one approach fails, you adapt. When markets shift, you pivot. When better opportunities emerge, you redirect. But you never abandon the fundamental purpose: building something valuable that serves others. Contrast this with a man who becomes attached to a specific business model rather than to the purpose that model was meant to serve. When the market changes and his model becomes obsolete, he cannot adapt. He goes down with his ship, confusing loyalty to a failed approach with determination about purpose. This is rigidity where flexibility is required. Or consider the woman who abandons her purpose of mastering her craft because one particular style or method does not bring immediate success. This is flexibility where rigidity is required. The distinction between roots and branches is simple to state, but requires constant vigilance to maintain. Most people have never explicitly identified what their actual roots are, the fundamental purposes and principles that should never change. They live their lives never examining which things should be rigid and which should be flexible. This confusion leads to the worst of both worlds, surrendering what should be maintained and maintaining what should be adapted. Here is the practice. Write down your current primary purpose. Beneath it, list every specific approach, tactic, timeline, and method you are using to pursue it. Now label each as either root or branch. Root means fundamental purpose or principle. This does not change. Branch means tactical approach. This should change readily when circumstances suggest adaptation is wise. If you have more than one or two roots, you have not done the exercise honestly. Most things in any pursuit should be branches. I learned to paint relatively late in life, during my darkest period after leaving the Admiralty. My early efforts were dreadful, truly awful. I had no natural talent. But I identified my route. I would become competent enough to find satisfaction in the craft. Everything else was branch. Which techniques to use? Branch. What subjects to paint? Branch. How long it would take? Branch. Whether others appreciated my work? Branch. The only immovable element was the determination to achieve basic competence. This clarity transformed the experience. Each failed canvas was not evidence I should quit. That would be confusing branch with root. Each failure was information about what techniques I needed to learn, what skills required development. I adapted methods constantly, while the fundamental determination never wavered. After some years, I achieved what I had set out to achieve, not because I possessed great talent, but because I understood which element was root and which were branches. Apply this framework to whatever you are pursuing. When you face setback or need to change direction, ask, am I abandoning a branch or a root? If it is a branch, a specific tactic, method, or timeline, change it without hesitation. Flexibility here is wisdom. If it is a root, a fundamental purpose or principle, hold it absolutely firm. Rigidity here is integrity. Most decisional paralysis comes from not knowing which category applies. Once you clearly identify your roots, every other decision becomes simpler. Does this change require abandoning a root? No. Then the decision is purely tactical. Choose what works best, given current conditions. The oak tree does not deliberate about whether to bend its branches in the wind. It bends because that is what branches do. But it does not uproot itself no matter how fierce the storm. Its roots go deep into soil, and nothing moves them. Develop this same wisdom, flexible in tactics, immovable in fundamental purpose. This is what transforms determination from brittle stubbornness into resilient strength. Why resolve grows stronger under fire. Most people believe determination is a finite resource that depletes with use, like water drawn from a well. They think, I can only maintain my resolve for so long before I must give in. This belief guarantees eventual surrender. The truth is exactly opposite, and I observed this truth most clearly during the darkest nights of 1940 and 1941. The Blitz began in September. Night after night, German bombers came. Night after night, London burned. Rational observers expected British resolve to break. How long could people endure this? I watched closely, for upon the answer hung our survival. And I observed something that contradicted all conventional wisdom about human endurance. After the first terrible nights, our people did not weaken. They hardened. The woman whose home was destroyed on Monday night did not surrender to despair on Tuesday. She reported to her factory job more determined than before. The man who lost friends in the bombing did not counsel peace. He volunteered for additional fire watch duty. Why? Because each act of refusal, each choice to maintain purpose despite loss, made the next refusal easier and more automatic. By December, London's spirit was stronger than it had been in September. The bombardment intended to break our will had forged it harder. This is not inspiring rhetoric designed to comfort. This is practical observation of how human resolve actually functions when properly understood. Your capacity for determination works exactly like physical muscle. Lifting weights does not deplete your strength, it builds it. The strain itself creates stronger capacity. Similarly, maintaining resolve under pressure does not exhaust your determination. It increases your tolerance for future pressure. Each time you refuse to accept defeat, you strengthen the neural pathways that make such refusal easier next time. But just as with physical training, you must understand the proper pattern. Stress, recovery, stress, recovery, each cycle leaving you stronger than before. You cannot maintain maximum intensity indefinitely. That way leads to exhaustion. But neither should you avoid all difficulty for fear of depletion. That way leads to atrophy. The proper approach is progressive resistance. Face challenges, maintain determination through them, allow recovery, then face slightly larger challenges. Over time, capacity increases dramatically. Here is what you must grasp. The person who capitulates quickly at first test finds the second capitulation easier still. Surrender is also habit-forming. The man who gives up on his first business venture finds giving up on the second easier. The woman who lets criticism silence her once becomes more easily silenced each time. This is genuine depletion, but it comes from non-use of the determination muscle, not from overuse. Your resolve atrophies when not exercised precisely as physical muscle does. Consider your current challenges through this lens. The difficulty you face now is not depleting your determination. It is building it, provided you maintain your resolve through it. The frustration you feel is not evidence that your capacity is exhausted. It is the feeling of capacity being stressed so it may grow stronger. This reframe transforms everything about how you approach sustained difficulty. You are not enduring depletion. You are undergoing strengthening. I maintained this understanding throughout the war's darkest periods. Each crisis weathered, each setback endured while refusing to accept defeat, increased my capacity for the next crisis. By 1944, challenges that would have overwhelmed me in 1940 were manageable because I had built such capacity through accumulated exercise of determination. This was not some innate quality I possessed. It was developed capacity, built deliberately through repeated refusal to surrender when circumstances pressed. Start small if you must. Face minor frustrations this week, and choose to maintain determination rather than surrendering to discouragement. Each success builds capacity for larger challenges. Over months and years of deliberate practice, you will develop resolve that appears superhuman to those who have never exercised this capacity. But it is not superhuman. It is simply what happens when you understand that determination strengthens with use rather than depleting, and you structure your life accordingly. The Blitz did not break London. It forged London stronger. Your current pressure will do the same for you, if you understand how resolve actually functions. Standing alone when everyone counsels surrender. There will come a moment, perhaps has already come, when you are absolutely convinced of the right course, yet everyone around you counsels surrender. This isolation is not evidence that you are wrong. It may be precisely the test that reveals whether you possess genuine conviction or merely preferences that depend on social validation. Throughout the 1930s, I warned about Hitler, while the entire British establishment told me I was mistaken. These were not fools or cowards. They were intelligent, educated men who genuinely believed that accommodation with totalitarianism was possible and preferable to confrontation. Chamberlain returned from Munich in 1938, waving his agreement and declaring peace in our time. Parliament erupted in celebration. The nation rejoiced. I stood and spoke against appeasement, and faced a wall of hostility. How dare I criticize this diplomatic triumph? Even close political allies distanced themselves from my warmongering. The respectable opinion was unanimous. Churchill was stuck in the past, unable to understand modern diplomacy, clinging to outdated ideas about power and conflict. The isolation was painful. The criticism was constant. But I held fast to my judgment, not from arrogance, but from careful examination of Hitler's nature and intentions. The reasonable voices were making fundamental errors about the character of the threat we faced. This is the test you must learn to navigate. When you stand alone in your conviction while reasonable people counsel surrender, you face two possibilities. Either you are wrong and should reconsider, or you are right but isolated. The difference is subtle but crucial. How do you know which situation you face? Here is the framework. When isolated, conduct formal review of your position. List the strongest arguments against it. Address each one honestly. Are they identifying genuine flaws in your thinking, or are they making category errors, confusing difficulty with impossibility, probability with philosophical necessity, high costs with wrong action? This review prevents stubborn maintenance of actual error while also preventing surrender of truth to social pressure. You may conclude you are wrong. Fine, adjust your position. Or you may conclude you are right despite isolation. Fine, hold fast. But you must conduct this review consciously. Understand why people counsel surrender even when genuinely concerned for your welfare. They see the costs of your conviction, strained relationships, missed opportunities, continued difficulty. They wish to spare you pain, but they make an error, assuming that because your path is costly, it is therefore wrong. High cost does not invalidate a position, it merely makes it costly. The question is not whether maintaining conviction requires sacrifice, but whether the purpose justifies the sacrifice. Throughout my isolation in the 30s, people close to me urged accommodation. They saw the political price I was paying for my stance. They were right about the price. They were wrong that the price made my position incorrect. When war came in September 1939, events proved my judgment sound. Had I surrendered my conviction during that decade of isolation, Britain would have been utterly unprepared for what followed. Holding fast to conviction while isolated was necessary preparation for the moment when that conviction mattered most. You will face similar tests at smaller scale. Perhaps you are pursuing a venture others dismiss as impractical. Perhaps you maintain a position at work that colleagues disagree with. Perhaps you hold to principles that make you socially uncomfortable. The isolation tempts you to question whether you are simply stubborn, whether the reasonable voices are right, whether you should abandon your conviction to restore harmony. Here is what you must do. Examine your reasons for holding the position. Write them down explicitly. If your conviction rests on sound principles and careful judgment, if you have examined opposing arguments and found them wanting, if the isolation comes from others' discomfort with difficulty rather than your error in judgment, then hold fast. The discomfort of isolation does not constitute evidence of error. It simply constitutes the cost of conviction. But if your examination reveals that you are maintaining a position from pride, from unwillingness to admit mistake, from emotional attachment rather than rational judgment, then adjust your position. There is no shame in reconsidering. The shame is in stubbornly maintaining error, or in surrendering truth to social pressure. Neither extreme serves you. What serves you is conscious examination followed by either thoughtful adjustment or determined persistence as the situation warrants. I stood alone for a decade. The isolation was painful but necessary. When circumstances changed and I was called to lead, that decade of maintained conviction while isolated had prepared me for the task. Your current isolation, if your conviction is sound, is similarly preparing you. The art of strategic patience. Strategic patience is not passive acceptance disguised as waiting. It is active preparation during periods when immediate action would be futile. This distinction is subtle but absolutely crucial, for many people confuse the two and either waste themselves in premature action or surrender while calling it patience. From 1929 to 1939, I held no government position. My warnings about Germany were ignored. Reasonable observers assumed my career was finished. Many in my situation would have either accepted political retirement or desperately sought any position merely to remain visible. I did neither. Instead, I used those years with deliberate purpose. I wrote millions of words, including my biography of Marlborough. I studied military history and strategy with renewed intensity. I cultivated contacts in intelligence services. I maintained my readiness for the call to service I believed would eventually come. When that call came in September 1939, I was more prepared to lead Britain than I had been a decade earlier. Those years were not wasted. They were invested. This is strategic patience, using waiting time to build the capacities you will need when circumstances favor action. It differs utterly from passivity, which involves no such preparation. The passive man simply endures time while hoping conditions improve. The strategically patient man actively creates readiness so that when conditions do improve, he is positioned to act effectively. How do you distinguish between the two? Ask yourself, what am I building during this waiting period? If you cannot articulate specific capacities you are developing, resources you are accumulating, alliances you are forging, skills you are mastering, then you are not being strategically patient. You are being passive. True strategic patience involves clear understanding of what conditions must change before action is favorable, combined with active work to position yourself for that moment. Here is the framework. First, define explicitly what conditions must shift before full action is favorable. Do not wait indefinitely for perfect conditions. They never arrive. But identify minimum threshold conditions. Perhaps you need certain skills. Perhaps you need specific resources. Perhaps you need market conditions to evolve. Whatever the conditions, write them down specifically. This prevents indefinite postponement, while also preventing premature action that wastes resources. Second, create your preparation plan. What can you actively build during this waiting period? Skills to develop? Relationships to cultivate? Resources to accumulate? Knowledge to acquire? Strategic patience means using every day of waiting to strengthen your position so that when conditions favor action, you are ready. This transforms waiting from passive endurance into active investment. Third, set a deadline. Even with unfavorable conditions, you will act by this date. This prevents patience from becoming permanent postponement. You are not waiting forever for perfect circumstances. You are preparing until specific conditions are met, or until your deadline arrives, whichever comes first. Then you act with whatever imperfection remains. I learned to paint during my darkest period after leaving the Admiralty. I could have spent those months in bitterness or frantic attempts to force my way back into office. Instead, I discovered a pursuit that brought satisfaction while my political fortunes were at their lowest. This was not escape or resignation, it was strategic use of time when direct political action was not available to me. The painting developed capacities: patience, attention to detail, ability to see what was actually before me rather than what I expected, that served me well when I returned to office. The danger is confusing strategic patience with fear disguised as prudence. Some people use "conditions aren't right yet" as rationalization for indefinite delay, rooted not in strategic wisdom but in terror of action. Be brutally honest. Are you preparing or are you postponing? The difference is whether you are actively building capacity during the waiting period and whether you have defined what conditions would make action favorable. If you are genuinely preparing, developing skills, accumulating resources, positioning yourself for action when conditions shift, then your patience is strategic. Continue it with confidence. If you are simply hoping circumstances will somehow improve while you take no active steps to ready yourself, then you are not being patient. You are being passive. And passivity is slow surrender wearing the mask of wisdom. Set your conditions. Build your preparation. Define your deadline. Then wait actively, knowing you are investing time rather than wasting it. When your moment comes, you will be ready. How obstacles reveal your true purpose. Obstacles serve a function most people never recognize. They clarify what you truly value versus what you merely prefer. The man who abandons his purpose at the first genuine obstacle never truly held that purpose. He held a preference that collapsed when tested. This is not judgment, but diagnosis. Obstacles reveal the difference between genuine purpose and pleasant fantasy. After Gallipoli's catastrophe in 1915, I faced the most severe obstacle of my political career. My reputation was damaged. My judgment was questioned. My political future appeared finished. This obstacle asked a clarifying question. Do you genuinely believe you possess capacity to serve Britain at its highest levels, or was that merely pleasant ambition when circumstances favored you? The question was uncomfortable but valuable. Some ambitions I had held, certain positions I had wanted, revealed themselves under this pressure as preferences rather than purposes. I released them without difficulty, but the core conviction that I possessed capacity to serve Britain in its gravest hours that remained absolute regardless of the obstacle. The setback did not create this purpose. It revealed it by burning away preferences I had mistaken for conviction. This diagnostic function of obstacles is among their greatest values. Many people waste years pursuing preferences they have mistaken for purposes. Obstacles provide clarity quickly. When you encounter sustained resistance and your determination intensifies, you have discovered genuine purpose worth continuing despite difficulty. When resistance makes you realize you wanted the goal only if it came easily, you have discovered a preference. Neither is wrong, but confusing them wastes life. Here is the practice. When facing obstacles in any pursuit, ask yourself these questions with complete honesty. First, if achieving this required 3 times longer and more difficulty than I expected, would it still matter to me? If yes, you hold genuine purpose. If no, you hold preference. There is no shame in discovering you hold preference rather than purpose, but continuing to pursue it while pretending it is purpose serves no one. Second question. Am I pursuing this because I truly value the outcome, or because I have already invested time and hate to admit wasted effort? This is harder to answer honestly. We resist acknowledging sunk costs. But pursuing something primarily because you have already invested in it is not purpose. It is pride or stubbornness. Genuine purpose would matter even if you were starting fresh today. Third question. If no one would ever know whether I succeeded or failed at this, would I still pursue it? This question separates purposes rooted in genuine values from those rooted in external validation. Many pursuits we claim as purposes are actually bids for recognition or status. The obstacle reveals this when, stripped of the possibility of external reward, our determination evaporates. If your determination survives this question, if you would pursue this goal even with no audience, you have found genuine purpose. I learned to paint in my 60s. No one expected me to produce gallery-quality work. There was no external reward for competence, yet I pursued it because the activity itself mattered to me. The challenge of translating what I saw onto canvas, the satisfaction of incremental improvement, the peace that came from hours of focused attention. This was genuine purpose, albeit in a minor key compared to political service. The obstacles I faced, lack of natural talent, the hours required to develop basic competence, did not diminish my determination. They clarified it. Apply this diagnostic to your current pursuits. Some will reveal themselves as preferences dressed as purposes. Release them without guilt. They served their function of teaching you what does not actually matter deeply to you. Others will reveal themselves as genuine purposes, things you are willing to endure sustained difficulty to achieve. These warrant your continued determination precisely because the obstacles have clarified their importance to you. The obstacle before you now is asking, do you truly want this, or did you merely want it when you imagined it would be easier? Your honest answer reveals whether you should persist with adapted tactics or redirect your energy toward purposes that genuinely matter to you. Both conclusions are valuable. The only waste is continuing to pursue preferences while telling yourself they are purposes, or abandoning genuine purposes because obstacles made you doubt their value. Let obstacles clarify rather than defeat you. They are diagnostic tools, not enemies. Use them as such. Applying the unstoppable mindset to every domain, the unstoppable mindset is not a tool you deploy for career challenges while accepting defeat in relationships, health, or personal development. It is a fundamental orientation toward existence that, once truly grasped, colors everything. The man who maintains unstoppable mindset in business while accepting defeat in his marriage has not understood the philosophy. He has merely applied a technique to one area. The same principles that guided my refusal to surrender Britain in 1940 guided my learning to paint in the 20s, my historical writing in the 30s, my management of the black dog of depression throughout my life. The principles were identical, just applied to different domains. When learning to paint, I faced the same choice, except that my dreadful early efforts meant I could not become competent or acknowledge the setback while refusing that verdict. When writing history, I encountered the same test, surrender to critics' dismissals or maintain determination that I could produce work of lasting value. This is not a separate set of techniques for each domain. It is one integrated philosophy applied comprehensively. That integration makes each domain stronger. The determination I built through painting increased my capacity to withstand political setbacks. The sovereignty I maintained in politics strengthened my resilience against depression. This cross-domain strengthening occurs only with comprehensive application. Partial application creates isolated pockets of strength without developing overall capacity. Here is the practice. List the major domains of your life: career, finances, relationships, health, personal growth, creative pursuits. For each domain, ask with complete honesty, do I practice unstoppable mindset here, or do I accept defeat? Most people maintain determination in one or two domains while unconsciously surrendering in others. This inconsistency indicates incomplete understanding. You are treating unstoppable mindset as technique rather than philosophy. Consider relationships. The same principles apply. Sovereignty means you do not grant others' behavior authority to determine whether you maintain loving intent. You acknowledge their actions while refusing to conclude that their current state is final or that your efforts are pointless. Setbacks, arguments, misunderstandings, periods of distance differ from defeat, which is the conclusion that the relationship cannot improve. Obstacles clarify what you truly value in partnership versus what you merely preferred when conditions were comfortable. Apply this to health. Sovereignty means you do not grant a diagnosis authority to determine your spirit. You acknowledge medical realities while refusing to conclude that your situation is hopeless or that maintaining best possible vitality is pointless. Setbacks, symptoms, limitations, disappointing test results provide information for tactical adaptation, not verdicts justifying surrender of determination to maintain health within realistic bounds. The pattern repeats across all domains because the principles are universal. What changes is the specific application, not the underlying philosophy. When you understand this, you can take determination developed in one area and apply it to another. The business owner who has learned to persist through market downturns can apply that same capacity to maintaining exercise routines, despite not enjoying them. The artist who maintains determination through rejection can apply that capacity to financial challenges. The capacity is transferable because it is philosophical, not technical. But you must make this transfer consciously. It does not happen automatically. You must deliberately practice applying unstoppable mindset to domains where you have historically accepted defeat. Choose one such domain this month. Perhaps you have accepted that you will never be good with money, or never have a healthy body, or never develop artistic ability. These are verdicts you have rendered, not facts imposed by reality. Apply the same principles you would apply to a professional challenge. Acknowledge past failures as setbacks teaching what does not work. Refuse to conclude that past difficulties mean future impossibility. Identify what obstacles in this domain teach you about what tactical changes might work. I maintain this comprehensive application throughout my life. When facing the black dog of depression, I applied the same sovereignty I practiced in politics. I acknowledged the condition's reality, while refusing to grant it authority to determine my essential purpose or capacity. When learning new skills late in life, I applied the same distinction between setback and defeat that served me in military and political reversals. This comprehensive integration meant that capacity developed anywhere strengthened me everywhere. Make this integration your aim. Not perfection across all domains. That is unrealistic. But conscious application of the same principles to every significant area of life. Over time, as you practice sovereignty in relationships, it becomes easier to practice in health challenges. As you distinguish setback from defeat in creative pursuits, the distinction becomes clearer in financial difficulties. The philosophy unifies, and your overall capacity increases dramatically. This is the difference between using unstoppable mindset and embodying it. Use is partial and technical. Embodiment is comprehensive and philosophical. Aim for embodiment. Your personal determination as civic duty. Every individual who refuses to accept defeat contributes to civilization's defense against all forces that would reduce humanity to helpless victims of circumstance. This is not metaphor. This is literal truth. When you maintain determination in the face of adversity, you demonstrate to everyone who observes you that circumstances need not be sovereign. You prove that human agency matters. You show that individuals can shape outcomes rather than merely endure them. When I became Prime Minister in May 1940, my personal refusal to surrender became inseparable from Britain's national resolve. But I did not create that national resolve. I gave voice to something that already existed in the people. Throughout the war, I observed how individual determination rippled outward, strengthening everyone it touched. The factory worker who reported to work the morning after bombing destroyed his home told everyone who saw him, "We do not surrender to circumstances." The mother who maintained her children's routines despite chaos told her neighbors, "Normal life continues because we choose it." These were not famous leaders or exceptional people. They were ordinary citizens whose personal choices not to accept defeat contributed to collective resistance. By the war's end, Britain's survival rested less on material resources than on accumulated individual choices to refuse surrender. Each person's private determination contributed to civilization's preservation. Your choices about accepting or refusing defeat function identically within your sphere, though the scale appears smaller. Consider how your response to difficulty affects others beyond yourself. If you have children, what are they learning from watching you face adversity? If you have colleagues, how does your determination or surrender influence their own? If you have community members who know your situation, what are you demonstrating about human capacity? This is not pressure to perform for others. It is recognition that your choices matter beyond yourself. You contribute to collective capacity for resistance by refusing to surrender, or you contribute to collective acceptance of limitation by capitulating. Throughout history, civilization's pivotal moments hinged not on material circumstances, but on whether certain individuals refused to accept what appeared inevitable. Marathon, where Greeks refused to accept that Persian numbers determined the outcome. The defeat of the Spanish Armada, where England refused to accept that Spanish power was invincible. Britain in 1940, when we refused to accept that German military superiority made defeat inevitable. In each case, individuals' refusal to grant circumstances sovereignty preserved civilization itself. Your personal cultivation of unstoppable mindset is not merely self-improvement, it is contribution to humanity's defense against all that would reduce us to passive victims of circumstance. This does not make determination a burden. It makes it meaningful. You are not just pursuing personal goals. You are participating in humanity's ongoing struggle for agency against determinism. This civic dimension transforms how you understand your own struggles. When facing difficulty that tempts you toward acceptance of defeat, remember that your response affects more than yourself. You are demonstrating possibility or impossibility to everyone who observes you. You are either strengthening collective capacity for resistance or contributing to collective acceptance of limitation. This responsibility need not feel heavy. It can feel ennobling. Your private determination serves purposes larger than your immediate circumstances. I did not maintain Britain's resolve single-handedly. Millions of individual Britons made similar choices in their own spheres: to continue despite loss, to maintain purpose despite fear, to refuse surrender despite cost. These accumulated choices, each seemingly small, together preserved a nation and, ultimately, a way of life. Your choices function similarly. They may seem small in isolation, but they contribute to patterns that either strengthen or weaken the fabric of free society. Make this conscious. When you face your next significant challenge, recognize that how you respond affects not only your immediate outcome, but the example you set for others. Choose determination not only for your benefit, but because you understand that civilization's capacity to resist tyranny, decline, and surrender depends on accumulated individual choices, including yours. This is not burden. This is privilege and purpose. Your determination is your civic contribution to humanity's defense of its own agency. Choosing your battles, the wisdom to know what not to fight. The military commander who fights every engagement exhausts his forces and loses the war. The person who maintains maximum determination about everything exhausts themselves and achieves nothing significant. True wisdom includes distinguishing between battles that serve your fundamental purpose and battles that merely satisfy ego or habit. This appears to contradict everything I have taught about refusing defeat, but it does not. The unstoppable mindset does not mean refusing to surrender everywhere and in everything. It means refusing to surrender in battles that matter, while having wisdom to release battles that do not serve fundamental purpose. I learned this through hard experience. Throughout my political career, I fought countless battles. Some were essential: opposing appeasement of Hitler, defending parliamentary democracy, maintaining Britain's will to resist invasion. Others were petty partisan conflicts that consumed energy without serving lasting purpose. With age and experience, I developed better judgment about which battles merited full commitment. Not every criticism required response. Not every political slight needed revenge. Not every disagreement demanded taking a stand. This was not weakness or surrender. It was strategic conservation of finite resources. The man who fights every battle ends up with no energy for battles that actually matter. By the time I led Britain through the war, I had learned to identify what genuinely mattered: defeating Nazi tyranny versus what felt important but was not, various political rivalries and personal slights. That judgment, knowing what to fight and what to release, was as important as determination itself. Here is the framework. Before committing to any battle, ask, does fighting this serve my fundamental purposes, or does it serve ego, habit, or social pressure? If the answer is ego, habit, or pressure, consider releasing it. This is not accepting defeat. It is wise resource allocation. You are not surrendering. You are choosing not to engage because engagement does not serve what matters most. The distinction is crucial. Surrender means I accept that I am defeated here. Release means I choose not to fight here because this battle does not serve my deepest purposes. Apply the 2-year test. For any battle you are considering, ask, will this matter in 2 years? If yes, it may be worth fighting. If no, it is probably an ego battle or temporary irritation you can release. This temporal perspective prevents wasting determination on ephemeral conflicts while ensuring you maintain commitment to things of lasting importance. Most battles that feel urgent in the moment prove insignificant from 2-year perspective. Throughout the war, I maintained absolute determination about defeating tyranny while releasing countless smaller conflicts. When subordinates disagreed with tactical decisions, I listened to their arguments. When they were right, I adapted. When they were wrong, I overruled them and moved on. I did not carry grudges or fight battles to prove my authority. Such battles would have consumed energy needed for the actual war. This selective engagement, maintaining full determination where it truly mattered while releasing what did not, enabled effective leadership. Apply this to your life. You are likely fighting several battles that do not serve your fundamental purposes. Perhaps conflicts with colleagues over matters that will not matter next month. Perhaps struggles to change people who do not wish to change. Perhaps attempts to win approval from those whose opinion should not matter to you. These battles consume determination you need for what actually matters. Release them without guilt. You are not surrendering. You are deploying your finite resources wisely. Divide your current commitments and conflicts into 3 categories. Essential battles aligned with fundamental purposes. Fight these with full determination. Refuse surrender. Potentially worthwhile battles but not essential. Engage if resources allow, but do not sacrifice essential battles for these. Ego battles and meaningless conflicts. Release these entirely. Most people fight too many Category 3 battles while neglecting Category 1. Mature wisdom means accurate categorization, followed by ruthless prioritization. This is sophisticated determination, not surrender. The oak tree does not fight every wind. It bends where bending serves survival, while maintaining rigid roots in soil. You must develop similar wisdom, absolute determination about what truly matters, serene release of what does not. This integration of fierce commitment and wise disengagement represents one of the highest achievements in developing unstoppable mindset. Not every hill is worth dying on. Know which hills truly matter. Fight for those with everything you possess. Release the rest without regret. This is not weakness. This is wisdom. When determination becomes second nature in the beginning, refusing to accept defeat requires conscious effort and deliberate choice. You must remind yourself of principles. Fight against habitual surrender responses. Consciously apply techniques. This is necessary, but it is not the destination. The destination is when refusing defeat becomes your automatic response, when you cannot imagine responding any other way, when determination requires no more effort than breathing. By 1940, refusing to surrender Britain was not effortful determination for me. It was simply who I had become. Standing alone against counsel to negotiate with Hitler did not feel like overcoming temptation. It felt like the only possible response. The option of surrender did not arise in my consciousness as possibility. Not because I was suppressing it, but because decades of consciously practicing sovereignty over accepting defeat had made refusal my default response. This is embodiment. The philosophy has integrated so deeply that it shapes your automatic responses without conscious intervention. You have not eliminated the capacity for surrender. You have simply made refusal of surrender your nature rather than your effort. This transformation from conscious practice to automatic excellence is available to anyone willing to invest the years of deliberate practice required to reach it. Understand the progression. Stage 1. You do not know you have been surrendering sovereignty unconsciously. Stage 2. You recognize surrendered sovereignty but cannot yet stop doing it. Stage 3. You can exercise sovereignty, but it requires deliberate effort. Stage 4. Sovereignty is automatic, requiring no conscious effort. Most people who learn unstoppable mindset reach Stage 3 and think they are done. But Stage 4 is the actual destination, where determination becomes natural rather than effortful. You reach this state not through dramatic moments, but through accumulation of small decisions. Each time you face difficulty and choose sovereign response over surrender, you build the neural pathway that will eventually become automatic. Researchers estimate 10,000 repetitions create automatic response. You will not count them. Simply commit to practicing sovereignty response every time difficulty arises. After enough repetitions, likely 2 to 3 years of daily practice, the response becomes automatic. You have reached embodiment. How do you know you are approaching this state? Monitor the effort required. Initially, exercising sovereignty when facing setback requires significant conscious effort. Over months of practice, the effort decreases. After a year or two, you notice you are often exercising sovereignty before consciously realizing you made a choice. Eventually, surrender options do not even arise in your consciousness as possibilities. When determination requires no more effort than breathing, you have reached embodiment. This involves identity shift. You move from "I am someone who practices determination" to "I am someone who is determined." This is not semantic. It is profound transformation. Your self-concept changes. You no longer see yourself as someone fighting against tendency to surrender. You see yourself as someone whose nature is to refuse surrender. This identity shift marks the transition from practice to embodiment. After decades of consciously practicing refusal to accept defeat through political exile, military catastrophes, personal losses, criticism, isolation, something shifted for me. I no longer needed to remind myself not to accept defeat. The response had become automatic. When France fell and advisors presented arguments for negotiation, I did not have internal struggle between should I maintain determination or should I surrender. The option of surrender literally did not arise as possibility. This is what embodiment looks like. You cannot force this transformation. It emerges naturally from sustained practice, but you can accelerate movement toward it through conscious attention to the transition. When you exercise sovereignty in response to difficulty, notice the effort required. Is it still significant conscious work? Continue practicing. When you notice moments where you exercised sovereignty before consciously thinking about it, mark those as glimpses of emerging embodiment. Over months and years of consistent practice, these glimpses become more frequent until they become your default state. Begin your count today. Each time you choose sovereign response over surrender when facing difficulty, you have made one repetition toward the 10,000 that create automatic response. 2 to 3 years seems long, but those years will pass regardless. The question is whether you will spend them building embodied determination or continuing to surrender unconsciously. The choice, as always, is yours. When determination becomes second nature, you will have reached the summit, not because the journey ends, but because you have become someone for whom refusal of defeat is simply how you are. The marriage of resolve and humility. The integration of absolute determination with deep humility represents one of the highest achievements in developing unstoppable mindset. These appear contradictory. How can you maintain unwavering conviction while acknowledging your limitations and fallibility? Yet they must coexist. I have known men of great determination who lacked humility. They became tyrants, unable to learn from mistakes because confidence prevented seeing errors. I have known men of great humility who lacked determination. They became ineffectual, so aware of their limitations they never stood for anything. Neither extreme serves well. Throughout the war, I maintained absolute conviction that Britain would not surrender. This determination was rigid and non-negotiable. Simultaneously, I maintained openness to advice, willingness to change tactical approaches. After Gallipoli, I could have defended my decisions to protect my reputation. Instead, I examined what I had done wrong, acknowledged errors publicly, learned from them. This humility did not weaken my determination to serve Britain in future crisis. It strengthened it by ensuring I would be wiser when opportunity came. During the war, I listened carefully to advisors who disagreed with me. I changed strategies when evidence suggested my approach was failing. I acknowledged when subordinates were right and I was wrong. But I never compromised the fundamental determination we would not accept defeat. See the distinction? Humble about tactics, methods, my own fallibility, absolutely determined about fundamental purpose. This integration of humility and determination enabled effective leadership rather than either tyrannical rigidity or ineffective accommodation. Here is the framework. Determination applies to your fundamental refusal to accept defeat in what matters most. You are absolutely rigid here. Humility applies to your recognition that your current understanding is incomplete. Your methods may need refinement. Your capacity has room for growth. You are completely open here. The error most people make is applying humility to the determination level. Perhaps I should just accept defeat, or applying determination to the humility level. I know the perfect approach and will not consider alternatives. Proper integration means each quality applies to its appropriate level. You can be simultaneously confident that your fundamental purpose is worth pursuing and humble about whether your current approach is optimal. These do not contradict. In fact, genuine confidence enables genuine humility. When you are not defending fragile ego, you can acknowledge limitations and learn from mistakes. Conversely, genuine humility enables genuine confidence. When you are committed to learning and growing, you can maintain determination because you know setbacks teach rather than defeat. When you face failure or criticism, humility means asking, "What can I learn from this? How might I be wrong?" Determination means refusing to conclude, "Therefore I should surrender my fundamental purpose." Both responses can occur simultaneously. You learn while refusing to surrender. This integration transforms every setback into educational experience rather than either ignored threat, no humility, or devastating defeat, no determination. Practice holding both consciousnesses simultaneously. Write 2 statements about your current primary pursuit. First, your determination statement. I refuse to accept defeat in this fundamental purpose, regardless of setbacks or difficulty. This should be absolute. Second, your humility statement. I recognize that my current approach may be flawed. I may be missing important information. I have much to learn, and I welcome correction and advice about tactical elements. This should be equally genuine. When setbacks occur, reaffirm both statements. This setback does not change my fundamental determination, but it may reveal flaws in my approach that I should examine humbly. This dual affirmation integrates determination and humility rather than forcing choice between them. Most people oscillate between stubborn pride, all determination, no humility, and excessive self-doubt, all humility, no determination. Mature wisdom holds both simultaneously. I maintained this integration throughout my life. When leading Britain through crisis, I was absolutely determined about our fundamental purpose, while completely open to tactical adjustments and to acknowledging my own limitations. This integration prevented both the rigid stubbornness that maintains failed approaches and the excessive accommodation that abandons purpose when challenged. It enabled sophisticated, adaptive, yet fundamentally unshakable leadership. Develop this capacity. Be absolutely determined about fundamental purposes and principles. Hold them with unwavering conviction. Simultaneously, be deeply humble about your current understanding, your tactical approaches, your inevitable limitations. Be willing to learn, to adjust, to acknowledge mistakes. These qualities do not contradict when applied to their appropriate levels. They complement, creating sophisticated maturity that transcends either-or thinking. True mastery requires both absolute determination and deep humility. Together they create unshakable will guided by wisdom. The highest expression, service beyond self-personal. Personal success becomes secondary when you discover that your deepest fulfillment comes from using your indomitable will in service of purposes that transcend your individual existence. This is not selfless sacrifice in the sense of denying your own needs. It is recognition that your greatest satisfaction comes from contributing to something larger than yourself, your family's flourishing, your community's strength, your nation's preservation, civilization's advance. When I led Britain through the war, I was not sacrificing my interests for others. I was pursuing my deepest purpose, which happened to align with Britain's survival. The distinction matters. This is not about noble self-denial. It is about discovering that your most profound purposes inherently involve contribution to others. My personal determination became inseparable from collective purpose, and I discovered something unexpected. This alignment produced fulfillment that purely individual achievements never had. Writing my histories brought satisfaction. Painting brought pleasure. But leading Britain through its darkest hour toward victory brought something deeper. The knowledge that my determination had served purposes larger than myself, had contributed to outcomes that would matter long after I was gone. I learned that the highest expression of unstoppable mindset is not using it to achieve personal goals, but using it to serve purposes worth fighting for, regardless of personal benefit. As you develop unstoppable mindset, you may discover that your deepest purposes are not purely individual. Yes, you want to succeed in your career, but when you examine why, you find you want to create value for others, contribute something meaningful, leave the world better than you found it. Yes, you want your relationships to thrive, but when you examine why, you find you want to be source of strength and love for others, create family culture of resilience and joy. This discovery transforms everything. You are not sacrificing personal determination for service. You are discovering that service is what your determination most deeply seeks. Consider your current primary challenge. Now expand your thinking. How does your response to this challenge affect others? If you have children, what are they learning from watching you face adversity? If you have colleagues, how does your determination or surrender influence their own? If you have community members who know your situation, what are you demonstrating about human capacity? This is not pressure to perform for others. It is recognition that your choices matter beyond yourself. Each choice you make to refuse defeat sends ripples you will never fully see. The colleague who observed your determination during difficult project and drew strength from it months later in her own crisis. The child who remembered how you faced adversity and applies those lessons decades later. The stranger who heard your story and found courage to pursue her own purpose. These ripples are real, even if you never witness them. Write this sentence: if I maintain determination through my current challenge, who beyond myself might benefit? List specifically. Family members observing you, colleagues working alongside you, community members facing similar challenges, future people who might hear your story. Do not be grandiose. List real people in your actual sphere. Then write, my refusal to accept defeat in this challenge contributes to, perhaps preserving business that employs people, perhaps modeling resilience for your children, perhaps demonstrating that recovery is possible for others facing similar health challenges. This connection to larger purpose makes maintaining determination through difficulty more sustainable because it is rooted in meaning that transcends temporary setbacks. You are not just overcoming obstacle for personal benefit, you are demonstrating possibility to others. You are contributing to culture of resistance rather than acceptance. You are showing people in your sphere what it looks like to refuse surrender. This perspective transforms determination from personal resource management to contribution to collective human capacity for resistance. Throughout my life, I learned that the purposes that mattered most were those that served something beyond my individual success. Defending Britain served the preservation of free civilization. Maintaining determination through personal crises served as example to others facing similar struggles. Contributing historical perspective served future generations who would need to understand their past. The personal satisfaction that came from these contributions exceeded anything purely individual achievement could have provided. Discover this for yourself. Your determination, when directed toward purposes larger than individual success, finds its highest expression and deepest meaning. This is not burden. It is fulfillment. The choice you make about accepting or refusing defeat shapes not only your life but ripples through time and society in ways you will never fully see. Choose determination not only for yourself but because you understand that your choice contributes to patterns that either strengthen or weaken civilization's capacity to resist all that would reduce us to passive victims of circumstance. Never give in. Never, 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 never. Not for yourself alone, but for all those who depend upon your example, your strength, your refusal to surrender. This is the highest expression of unstoppable will service to something larger than self. This is where determination finds its ultimate meaning and deepest satisfaction. Your choice begins now. What will you make of it?